drivers for business owners to look at, besides we talked about their customer dependency. There's also a case of vendor dependency. So I had a Canadian client a couple of years ago. It was a fascinating business. It was a money machine. The guy was just printing money, and he provided a service that required a specific and fairly unique product that was used in extremely large volumes, and there was only one provider of that product. And buyers looked at the business and said, "Wow, if this vendor for this product says I'm not going to sell to you anymore or jacks the price way up, that's a business that's got a very high risk factor." And virtually every interested buyer who was interested for every other reason about the company, they walked away from it. We eventually weren't able to get a buyer for that business for that very reason, because of that singular dependency on that one vendor. So that's another key criteria that business owners need to look at.
If the business was so successful, couldn't they have built out the technology to become their own vendor?
It required an extremely specialized manufacturing process that would have taken millions and millions of dollars if they had the knowledge on how to manufacture it, to buy the equipment and set up an entire operation. So yeah, that for the size of this company, it wasn't a huge company, but for an individual buyer or a small private equity deal, it would have been very attractive. But the math wouldn't have worked for them to try to set up their own operation and manufacture this raw material that the business required.
Couldn't they have gotten a loan to then acquire their vendor, so then they would just vertically integrate with themselves?
That company was family owned and was a third generation business, and they had zero interest in selling, nor did they have an interest in buying my client, because my client was technically in a different business they were in. They were a manufacturing company. My client was a service company.
What I mean was, the company that was trying to sell itself, that had this dependence on the vendor, why didn't they buy the vendor? And then they just merged the two companies, so they provide their own raw materials and manufacturing for themselves.
The manufacturing vendor was a third generation business that was infinitely larger than my client. And my client had no knowledge how to run a company like that. And the vendor had zero interest in selling.
And the vendor wasn't interested in acquiring.
No, they weren't, because they saw my client as being in a completely different business than they were in. But that business required the use of their product.
You win some, you lose some.
Yeah, well, that's very true. But those are just some of the complicating factors we see in businesses.
What is one final piece of advice that you would give business owners that either they're thinking about selling now, or they are selling is something that they would consider even if it's in the far off future?
Planning is key, and understand that selling a company is quite literally a full-time job on top of a full-time job. And a lot of business owners try to go it alone and handle their own transaction. And that is almost never ultimately in their best interest. It's got to be in penny wise and pound foolish. We're happy to work with them in Raincatcher, but my advice is to get professional representation when you're selling a company, because there are a lot of complexities around that fact. Things that get into working capital, for example, on the balance sheet, that can easily make a difference of sometimes millions of dollars and what the effective purchase price for that company really is. So it's a complex process. Selling a company is nothing like selling the product or service that they're offering to the market.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this insight, I've handpicked another video for you right here on the screen. For more actionable strategies that get you real results, hit subscribe.